recording.
Well, good evening, everyone, and very genuinely, thank you for being here. This will be a time commitment, but also a commitment of your talent, your opinions. I'm Rob Drake, and I've been serving as the interim city manager to follow Andy. I'll be here about 6 months and have enjoyed the community very much. This is my third city in Washington County to manage in the last, give or take, 30 years. And I turned out that I know a lot of folks here and I feel very comfortable in town. This is an exciting time for the city, and there have been some challenges, and there was an election in May that I know you all know about. I came the day just before, and the council acknowledges that the plan that was presented, things just didn't work. And the council instructed us to come back with a plan that made sense and included as many people as possible, and anyone is welcome. As we start taking testimony and people are participating, we welcome anyone who can come. That's our republic, that's our democracy, and it's really vital to be able to have that kind of exchange and hopefully remain civil and remain whole as a community. And so we're happy to have you here, and having been involved myself in my community of Beaverton for many years, you make choices when you do this, but having you here, your backgrounds and experiences is invaluable to this community. So thank you very much for your help. What we're going to do tonight is next ask you to introduce yourselves, and if you're here maybe as a group or representing something specific or some group, please say so. I think it'll be helpful. Everyone knows who's here. And then we will finish lastly with Mayor Lenahan welcoming you and sharing some of her thoughts, and then we'll get going. And there's a lot of new here for you, and there's a lot that you're going to see that you might not have seen before, and hopefully you'll learn a lot about a lot of good work has really been done to date. It wasn't fruitless. There's a lot of background work that was gleaned from the initial process. So it isn't something that went in the trash, and it's not a whole start over, but the attitude is a start over. And the elected officials genuinely appreciate your help and your participation. So with that, I'm going to ask you, I'll just start right here to my right, and then let's just go around.
Just quickly, Gary Lopez, resident here in North Plains. I grew up here as a young man, left, moved to Hillsborough for some time, married, had children, and here recently within the last 7 years, decided that North Plains is the place I want to continue to raise my family, and most importantly, why I'm here tonight.
Hi, Tom Burdock. I moved here in North Plains about 8 years ago. I retired from the military up in Bremerton. I got hired to work on an intel. Since then, I've ended up being a disability to the VA, so I'm pretty much fully retired. I actually just got back from Scotland like less than 24 hours ago. So.
Hi, good evening. My name is Joanna Fata. I'm a resident here in North Plains. Been here for a little bit over a year, but have been in Washington County for over 13, 14 years. Very familiar with the community, and just here as we plan on staying here for a while, and with my husband and my family.
Daniel Stinchfield. Family's been in Washington County, Western Washington County for about 4 or 5 generations. I moved back here after I got out of the service about 34 years ago, and I've seen the changes coming through the town. Was on planning commission, city council, went through this in '96, doing the 2020 plan. So I want to get back involved. I want to see, as a community, we come back together, we always have in the past, and get through what we got to get through. So, but I'm a resident here.
I'm Debbie Van Dolman, and I am here for our family. The Van Dolmans live in Washington County and have been here for 100+ years. So I'm basically representing them and being a part of the growth and watching that and making sure that everything goes in a positive way for everybody. So, yeah.
My name is Mitch Van Dollen. I am here representing large employers within the city of North Plains. I work for Jewett Cameron Company as the financial officer. I do have a familiar last name. It's not no relation is what I'd say, but I think we just determined it's probably pretty far back. So, I grew up in Hillsborough, went to school in Southern Oregon, but have lived in this area my entire life. So.
Don Weber, I'm beginning my 5th year at North Plains, live in Sunset Ridge, so I've kind of seen that whole idea of a new neighborhood thing. Love the small community, grew up in small town Montana, so I've kind of been around the whole issue of land and growth over the years. Lived for a while in Washington, and I'm here in this group as Parks and Rec board member. So glad to be here.
My name is David Amano. I moved to North Plains about a year ago with my family, but I've lived in Hillsborough for the past 6 years. Yeah, I'm a non-voting resident member of the committee.
Larry Gonzalez. I am representing the North Plains Library Board. Former city council person, I think planning commission, been in North Plains about 10 years. I live right across from the new development out north. So been seeing that go up, and it's like, it's a wondrous thing because they're putting in the sidewalk right. I get to hear the excavators all day long. It's a wonderful thing. I grew up in a small farming community back in Ohio. Just came back from Europe where I was looking at farm communities and the impact of people moving out for work on the small farm communities and the devastation that those family, 100-year-old family, hundreds of years old family farms have when there's nobody left. It's pretty impactful to see the town that you walk, drive through and there's nobody there. Beautiful town, great farms, nobody to work. I want to see that.
Dan Gervis, I'm here on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm a resident of Washington County, but not of North Plains. I'm a property and business owner in North Plains.
My name is Derek Ellerbrook. I'm a resident of Hillsborough, the South Study area, just across the freeway, kind of by the Jewett Cameron seed plant. I've lived in Hillsborough since '98, and we finished building our house in 2018. So we're coming up on 6 years over there, and clearly I have been very involved and interested in everything that's been going on ever since it came across in my mail. So I'm just here to keep continuing on that process, just education and sharing my opinions from kind of a financial perspective, as well as just.
I'm Jacqueline Hunt, and I represent landowners in the north and the west. I put myself through college picking berries on 1 acre that is now Bryn Hill. So I am a multi-generation farming family, and like the Van Dolmans, continue to farm. So representing farmers on the north and west.
Hi everyone, my name is NJ Johnson. I am a North Plains resident of a little over a year now. My fiance and I, she's a grade school teacher in Hillsborough, and I'm a planner in Scappoose. And so North Plains was both a beautiful community, but also a place where we could have equidistant commutes. And we've loved living here ever since then. And so when I heard about this project to take another look, and my experience as a land use planner, I was really excited to be a part of it.
Good evening. My name is Steve Faust. I am the Community Planning Director at 3J Consulting, land use and civil engineering firm in Beaverton. And from even before I started at 3J, I've been working on projects in North Plains, starting with the 2017 Housing Needs Assessment and Economic Opportunities Analysis. I then worked on the Comprehensive Plan Update, excuse me, and then following that on the Growth Boundary Expansion Program. And I'm happy to continue to work with this community and see where this process takes us in terms of how this community wants to grow in the future.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Reed. I am the City Finance Director. I see familiar faces here and I see new faces I haven't gotten to meet yet. So thank you very much for your time and being willing to be part of this kind of process of looking at this and talking about this and helping us figure this out. I've been the City Finance Director since January of 2020, so almost 5 years. Before that time, I was a consultant for cities and private interests as well on economic development and fiscal issues and things like that. In North Plains, the city of North Plains, my first encounter with them was in 2008 as a consultant. And over time, before finance director, got to work on a variety of things for the city over the years. And so it's been a pleasure to professionally see North Plains grow and do things and now be staff here. So thank you for being here.
Steve Miller, planning manager of the city of North Plains. Usually that's all we say, but it looks like we got to get a little bit more tonight. I have been with the city for 2 years now. Prior to that, I worked as the planning director over at Mario Design, which is a consulting firm similar to 3J. I've been in the planning profession now for over 30 years. I started my career at Deschutes County. Then I went to the city of Bend. When I left the city of Bend, I went to Polish Homes and joined the planning commission at the city of Bend and was part of their planning commission when they did a UGB expansion. So I have a little bit of experience when it comes to UGB expansions. Unfortunately, for this one, I got here at the end. So it's exciting to be where we are today and be a part of this and see where this all takes us. So appreciate everybody being here and providing your insights and knowledge to the process.
And I know that
Yes.
they are not here, but would you just give a?
Yeah, Rowan is our assistant planner, and Rowan's been with the city now a little more than a year. And because we weren't sure if we were going to get the overhead to work, Rowan ran back to the office to make copies of the PowerPoint presentation for everybody. So I won't say any more for Rowan, but I think Rowan might be here before we're all done and say a little bit more.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abu Hanif. I go the last time Hanif. I moved here in 2022 when hired by Intel, and last year I moved. My family moved here as well. I have 2 kids and would like the city, so we decided to settle down here. There's the kids and maybe spend the rest of our lives there. So, yeah.
Thank you. No, I'm gonna go last.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. I thought we were saving the last and
No.
certainly least. Eric Lawson, I'm the chair of the Economic Development Committee, and I'm here representing the EDC Commission. Excuse me. We just codified ourselves as a commission a few months ago. I've lived in North Plains about 7 years now. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and my wife's a school teacher in Hillsborough. So we love the community, love the town we're in, and don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon.
So I know we have a gentleman online, I believe, Rudy Cadlob. He's not here in the room, but he's online. I would like for Rudy to introduce himself and then maybe the technical staff, and then I'll wrap it up. Have we, is there 1 or 2 people online with the group?
Yeah, so we have, Rudy is a seat on this committee.
Yeah.
And then Emily Waldron is also has zoomed in. We have other guests from partner agencies and just folks tuned in because they're interested, Rudy and Emily.
But yeah, it'd be great to hear from Rudy, Emily, and then our technical staff, just quickly so we know who's in the room. If that works, and then I'll go from there. So, Rudy, would you mind going next?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not there in person, but I had to leave to come down to Phoenix. So I'm talking to you from Phoenix this evening. Yeah, I've been around North Plains for quite a while. We were involved with the very first. I'm the CEO of Coastal Pacific Communities. We notably developed Tarenco Station in Hillsborough and Villebois in Wilsonville, two of the largest master plan communities in the Portland region. Also, Murray Hill and Beaverton was my first project when I moved here from Boise in 1990. We started working in North Plains in about circa 97 with the last UGB expansion that ultimately yielded Sunset Ridge and Bryn Hill on the north. Did the master plan for Bryn Hill as well. I'm the past president, one of the past presidents of HBA, and have chaired the Street of Dreams committee for the last 10 years.
Great. Thank you, Rudy. How about Emily? Is she on?
She's on.
Okay.
You're muted, Emily.
Muted, Emily.
Thank you. I'm using my husband's headset and I'm not used to it, so it takes me a second. My name is Emily Waldron. I represent unincorporated 97133 for this committee. I am a third generation North Plains resident. When I was accepted, I learned that my grandmother, Donna Kunkel, was actually on the planning committee years ago and involved in this. So my family thinks it's kind of funny, but I'm now getting involved in these things again. But looking forward to being the representative and going back to my neighbors who right now are not part of North Plains, but we don't know what the future holds and how things will grow.
Thank you, Emily. And keep in mind, Rudy and Emily, if you have anything to say or when I have questions, please make sure that you raise your hand and staff will make sure to recognize you, okay? So a couple of staff members, technical folks, you're gonna have to call them out. I cannot see them.
Right, so let's, thank you, Mayor. So Laura Kelly, if you wouldn't mind saying hi.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Laura Kelly with the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. I'm here with Kevin Young, who will also introduce himself. So we're here for as a partner agency. Thanks.
Kevin?
Yes, I'll go next. Yeah, hello. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Kevin Young. I'm a senior urban planner with DLCD. One of the things I do is review UGB decisions by local governments.
Also online, Lewis Kelly with ODOT. Lewis, you there?
Yes, hello everybody. Lewis Kelly, ODOT Region 1. ODOT's interest in this is we are helping to fund the UGB planning that will kick off after this process or in line with this process. And then also obviously just maintaining our facilities in the area, UGB expansions and urban growth affect our facilities. And so we just want to help manage those things and kind of plan out our investments.
And Mayor, one more person, last but not least, Mr. Todd Borkowitz from Washington County.
Yes, the Todd Borkowitz, Washington County, and I'll be managing the county's partner ordinance for North Plains UGB expansion.
Thanks for being here.
And then with 3J, Natalie, if you wouldn't mind saying a hello.
Yeah, hi, I'm Natalie Olivier. I also work for 3J Consulting alongside Steve. I'm a planner there and I'll be assisting on this project.
Okay, that's it. All right, my turn. I'll keep it really brief. Terry Lenahan. I've been the mayor for the last 8 years. Before that, I was city council for 8 years. So I actually live right next to, in the same subdivision. Actually, Larry Gonzalez and I are neighbors. And so we enjoy many sunsets prior to the Bryn Hill subdivision being resurrected or created, right? And so we have been very much involved in understanding that part of our community
I remember my husband was the original purchaser of the home that we live in. And back in '98, we were in a subdivision and we were the new people in town and we were the new subdivision in town, right? And I'm sure folks back then in '98 were like, what's going on over there, right? So, and Dan's shaking his head. I'm sure Dan remembers that very much. So anyhow, it's my understanding Bryn Hill has been was a subdivision like a 30-year plan. Like that was a 25 to 30-year plan in master plan, right? And so I'm grateful for the experience to be a leader in this community for many reasons. I'm grateful for being here tonight representing the city council. I'm also really, really looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts on this topic, right? Pro, con, no question is a dumb question. I hope that you just ask those questions. If you don't understand something, you need, if there's an acronym that's being used and you don't know what it is, say timeout. What does that mean? Like, we want to hear from you, right? We want to hear from you. This is why we have the city council took a pause, and it's why we recognized May election. It's why we thought, okay, fine. You know what? We have a whole lot new folks in the community since we started this process 5 years ago, and you want to have more understanding of what is going on and how this is going to look for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now. So I'm really grateful that you're all here tonight, that you're going to take this time in the next few months to go through this process with us. Grateful for the folks who are online being a part of this conversation, and I'm looking forward to the community conversation, the community questions. And so again, please ask away, make sure that you understand. We're in good hands with Steve and 3J. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Mr. Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, thanks everyone for volunteering to be part of this relook committee. If you could share the presentation, Bill, that would be great. We'll talk about our agenda. I want to reinforce what Mayor Linehan said. Unfortunately for all of you tonight, I'm going to be talking a lot as we try to orient ourselves to the process and just get ourselves set for the meetings to come. But please do ask questions as we go along tonight. The whole purpose of tonight is for all of us to get onto the same page in terms of, you can go to the next slide, in terms of where how North Plains got to where we are today. First, what I'm going to do is walk through. You have one of the documents we gave you is a charter for this relook advisory committee, just kind of setting our purpose and role and ground rules. I'm going to walk through that, excuse me, quickly. Then I'm going to do my best to take you through the process that the city went through to get to the September 2023 UGB expansion recommendation. Then we'll talk about what our scope is for this relook process, this group and the city as a whole. And then we have we already have a community meeting, a broader community meeting coming up. And I want to talk about what we have in mind for that and see if we have any thoughts from you all on how we can best design and carry out that first community meeting. Natalie?
Yeah, it looks like for the folks online that the presentation isn't in presentation mode. We're still on the first slide.
Skip it. And then go to the main pane instead of that. Yep, no, to the left. That one.
No, well, it's a new laptop.
I do have a PDF of it as well.
Click there. Next to the print. Save. Right.
Okay, go ahead to that next slide. Should be looking at to advance pages. might work better. Eric's in the house.
Eric's moving. Yep, go for it.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the agenda that I just mentioned. And now let's go and talk about our charter. 2 slides ahead. Okay, first of all, the purpose of this relook advisory committee as given to us by City Council is to re-examine the September 2023 City Council Urban Growth Boundary Amendment recommendation. That includes reviewing the land need that we identified in that process and the urban growth boundary expansion analysis, which said, okay, now that we have our land need, where is the right place to expand the urban growth boundary? We're gonna look to you all to hear your thoughts on a recommendation eventually, but the location of where residential and employment land uses should be located, because that's what we're talking about here. And then eventually recommend to Planning Commission and City Council a new or a modified urban growth boundary amendment size and location. And I want to make it clear that the factual basis that was developed leading up to the decision, we're not going to be doing a new analysis or going back and redoing those reports, but we are going to use those facts that came out of those reports to as the basis for our new recommendation. Again, by the way, please ask questions as we go along if you have it. And I'll mention right now that go ahead.
Yeah, I know that we got some money in a grant for this process, right?
I'll actually touch on that a little bit later. And then maybe Bill, you can chime in at that point as well.
Rudy Kedlip has his hand up.
Rudy, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to hear from DLCD and understanding that this isn't just a desire to relook, but is it not a requirement that cities look at their urban growth boundary expansion? I mean, we really don't have a choice in terms of growing. Is that correct? We must meet the demands by state law.
Why don't I give it a shot, and then if Laura or Kevin want to add to what I have to say, they can. Due to the size of North Plains, which is less than 2,500 residents, excuse me, the city is not required to meet the land need that's identified for housing and employment. However, the state certainly encourages cities to plan for the future and plan for growth. And then however, the city did pass a housing needs analysis or adopt a housing needs analysis that identified a residential need. And that residential need, because the housing needs analysis was adopted, the residential need does need to be addressed either through taking measures inside the urban growth boundary or by expanding the urban growth boundary. And I'm going to get into a lot of this in the presentation, but I want to make sure I didn't misstate anything. So I'm wondering if Laura or Kevin have anything to add. And then we'll go to Natalie.
I think you've captured it really well, Steve. The one distinction I'll make is the threshold for cities that are required to do updates to their housing needs, and that gets into UGB expansions, is the 10,000 population threshold, not 2,500. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie.
Hi, sorry to interrupt again. It looks like we're still not having the correct view online here. It's still showing just the PowerPoint screen. Yeah, maybe resharing might work.
Yeah. How about now?
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, continuing on with the charter, the next slide that I have shows and in the document shows the composition of the charter in terms of the different interests represented. I think we all talked about those when we went around the table tonight, so I don't think we need to revisit that. Next slide. In terms of responsibilities of the RAC, as our process stands today, we plan to have this is the first of 4 meetings of this committee, and we expect that you are able to attend the 4 meetings. We'll talk a little bit about schedule towards the end of the present meeting. Please read any background materials that we provide you with. Listen carefully, ask questions, and that will help you make informed recommendations. You were added to this committee to provide a diverse set of perspectives and to strengthen community support for a revised or a modified urban growth boundary expansion recommendation. We will be bringing key decision points to you. We'll be giving you materials to review and key decision points that we ask you to review and weigh in on. We're going to be asking you about our community engagement efforts and ask that you help guide our activities so that we can get as many people aware and involved in this process as possible. And to that extent, when we do have the broader community meetings, we hope that you are able to attend some of those and really serve as hosts for those and encourage your friends and neighbors to participate.
One question?
Yes, sir.
It was just mentioned now this threshold of 10,000 that we're not required to do a housing plan analysis, but the other part of it is this urban growth boundary plan, which we've been saying we're required to do. So that to me is a little bit confusing. So it's the housing plan thing that we want to do it, but we don't have to do it. That's a part of the urban growth boundary plan?
Let me try to restate. And I'm going to go into more details on this. But the city of North Plains, due to its size, is not necessarily required to address identified land needs. But once the housing needs analysis was adopted and it identified this residential land need, then that residential land need must be addressed in some form or fashion. The employment land need is not required to be addressed, but the residential land need is. Does that help?
Well, when we say the UGB, which is what's been part of this thing for the last 7 years, I went to the meetings, they said we're required to do that by the state of Oregon. But now we're talking about this thing saying we're not required.
Again, if the city had not adopted a housing needs analysis, it would not be required to expand its urban growth boundary. But because the housing needs analysis was adopted that identified a residential land need, and I believe this was established through court cases, the city is required to address that residential land need. Why don't you keep that question and maybe it'll become clear as we go through the presentation. We can revisit that.
It's just a quick question. And again, if you want to push this till later, because we're jamming you up on slide 3, just defer. But there is maybe context. This isn't like the first UGB. We were at the end of a UGB window doing a refresh on the long-term strategy.
I think I will just, let's hold that. After the charter, I'm going to get into some of the how we got to where we are today, and hopefully that'll answer some of those questions.
A quick follow-up, because I'm hearing both of you, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so what's the minimum that we have to do? And then what is the outside, the outside edge of, like, what do we get to do if we really want to?
Right.
So I know you're gonna answer that later, so thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. So in terms of just ground rules about how we interact, these aren't anything out of the ordinary that you haven't seen before. Please be respectful of each other, listen to other perspectives, even if you disagree. We ask that you bring your concerns to this table. So this charter really guides kind of how you interact with this project, both in this room and out in the community. So if you have issues that you're concerned about, we want you to bring those to these discussions so we can talk them through. Refrain from any personal attacks or intentionally undermining the process that we're trying to run here. Be mindful that written communications could be subject to public records laws. So that's something we just always let people know, that those could be requested. So be mindful of your written communications outside of this meeting as well. If you are approached by the media, please do not state that you are representing this committee. You would be representing yourself and your own voice, not this group as a whole. And then these meetings are all going to be open to the public, but our deliberations are for the assigned advisory committee members alone. But we are going to have public comment period for each meeting that where our guests can provide their comment, and like you would at a city council hearing. Any questions there?
One other question. I was sorry about that. I looked at the previous, communication list of all the different public meetings over time and all the places that you put, newsletters and articles and all that stuff. And I'm just wondering, for us and for the community, is there going to be one kind of holding area where we can point people to and say, anything you want to know that we've done, or the city council's done, or the planning commission has done, all the records of that is going to be in this one spot?
Yeah, there is a project website, for instance, where the materials that we have tonight are posted. Again, I'll go into that in a little more detail, but there's a project website, and that's where we'll want to point everyone who wants to get the most up-to-date information on the process.
All right, thanks.
Can we go to the next slide, please, Bill?
Absolutely.
I mentioned the open public process. In terms of communications, if people are asking you for information, please refer them to Bill, and we can provide his contact information if you don't have it. Again, clearly represent just your own opinion. And then if you have any outside information that you've gathered in one way or another that you want to be shared with this group, please bring that to Bill or myself, and then we will make sure that everyone on the committee gets that information.
Do you mind sharing an example of what would be considered outside information?
Eric, if you decided to do some of your own research on the history of urban growth boundary expansions in the region,
Which I plan to do.
yeah, then, bring that tome of work
Excellent.
to Bill, and then we'll make sure everybody gets it. Okay, any other questions about our expectations, your role, the purpose of this committee and what we're trying to accomplish? Okay, now we'll get into the meat of things, which is how did we get to where we are today, and hopefully, excuse me, this will answer some of the questions that we have received. Let's go ahead. So just this is an abbreviated recap, at least. People have been talking about growth and expansion in North Plains for a long time. So in 2016, the city developed a community vision for the future, the 2035 vision. So a 20-year vision for the future. And that kicked off this effort to update the city's comprehensive plan, which is the plan that guides land use decisions, both in the city. As part of that, the city prepared a housing needs analysis, and an economic opportunities analysis. Those were adopted in 2017, as was the comprehensive plan. And then in 2020, the effort to look at expanding the urban growth boundary based on those housing and economic analyses began. And over the course from 2020 till September of 2023, there was a project advisory committee that met 8 times. All of those meetings were open to the public. There were 3 planning commission and city council hearings. There was, as there will be for this project, a project website. There were also, information was put out in the city's monthly newsletter, at times in the utility bills, on Facebook, and in local papers. The city also made presentations to the Chamber of Commerce and the Washington County Planning Commission. And then there was also direct contact with all of the property owners inside, that were inside the urban growth boundary study area. And we'll talk more about what that study area is in a little bit here. Next slide. In 2021, that should say HNA update and then EOA update, my mistake. The city missed a little bit of a window to get into the urban growth boundary expansion process. In that window between 2017 and 2020, I believe, is when the next population projection came out from Portland State University. The rules for expanding an urban growth boundary state that you need to use the most recent population projection. So the EOA, the economic opportunities analysis, and the housing needs analysis were both updated with those new population projections to adhere to that law. All the findings were updated with that new population projection. And then we went through the process, and eventually the city council made their recommendation in September of 2023. In March of 2024, the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 4026A, which stated that, if I get this wrong, please help me, that the UGB expansion is an administrative decision and not eligible to be voted on by the public. I believe that decision was stayed by a Washington County judge. And then, so it went on to the May ballot. And at that May ballot, a majority of votes that were cast by people who chose to vote, 72% opposed the UGB expansion. And it's also important to note that those no votes represented about 40% of the voting, the people eligible to vote in North Plains. And so while the results of that vote were clear, there was a lot of residents in the city of North Plains that we didn't hear from. And hence, I think that was another driver for city council to say, okay, let's take another look at this urban growth boundary recommendation. Next slide. I think you went the wrong way.
I think people could start. No, I think it's
There we go. So just a little bit on a policy framework for expanding an urban growth boundary in Oregon. This all relates to, so Oregon has statewide planning goals, 19 statewide planning goals. Goal 14 looks at urbanization. And the goal of Goal 14 is to provide an orderly and efficient transition from rural to urban uses. So that lays out a process by which the city does its study and recommends and approves an amendment to the urban growth boundary. That must then go to Washington County for their approval, and then ultimately to the state of Oregon. I think it's important to note, because not everyone is aware that when properties are brought into the urban growth boundary, those property owners are not required to annex into the city just because they're inside an urban growth boundary. They can maintain the current state of their land for as long as they wish to do so. Tyler?
I just want to clarify with the slide that the city passes its amendment to UGB expansion ordinance. The county actually also does a partner ordinance. We basically don't approve the cities, but we do approve an ordinance by the county. We have to do our own findings and all that, much just like the city does. And it's those two ordinances that actually go to the state, to the LCD for approval.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. All right, let's go to the next slide. In terms of the process to expand an urban growth boundary, I mentioned this earlier. The first thing that you need to do is establish the land need. That is done through typically a housing needs analysis for residential land, an economic opportunities analysis for both commercial and industrial land. There are other mechanisms whereby cities can also identify land that's needed for public facilities such as parks, public utility, pump stations, public utility facilities, things of that nature. And I mentioned here land efficiency measures. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I'll go into the land efficiency measures that North Plains enacted during this process. But before a city can expand its urban growth boundary, once that land need is identified, it must first look inside the current urban growth boundary to see if there are things they can do, changes to the development code or zoning in order to use the land a little bit more efficiently to address that need. So things like changing zoning to be more dense would allow a city to possibly meet a need depending on how big that need is. So things like upzoning to allow more density. There are a number of different possible land use efficiency measures, but one of the steps that North Plains took was to first enact some reasonable measures for land inside the urban growth boundary before it continued with the urban growth boundary expansion process. Then comes what's called the Goal 14. Once you've established what is the land need, what is that number of acres that is needed, then you can really get into the urban growth boundary, the Goal 14 boundary location process, which is where are we going to expand this boundary. The first thing that the city did was to create a preliminary study area, and I'm going to go through each of these steps in just a moment. Then there are certain types of land that can be excluded from that study area. Then the state has a system by which a city must prioritize different types of land. First priority for coming into the urban growth boundary, second, third, and fourth. And then there are things called suitability criteria. And finally, applying what are called the Goal 14 boundary location factors, these 4 factors. And that sounds confusing, but hopefully when I walk through it, it'll make a little more sense here. Next slide, please. Yeah. So first, establishing the land. So I'm going to pause right here and say, I think the city could see that there were pressures for growth, but the city didn't have to do, but because they're smaller than 10,000 in population, they didn't have to do any planning for the future. They could have just let things happen as they would, but the city felt that it's good practice to plan for the future of the city and to look at things like growth. And so they began a process to look at the housing needs and the employment needs. What the housing needs study is that over the next 20 years, the city was going to need about 1,500 additional housing units. 70% of those single-family detached, and 30% of those as either single-family attached, like townhomes, or multifamily. Next slide, please. Yes, sir.
A question on the growth question. When we determine how many houses we need, I guess the part that confuses me, like in Sunset Ridge and Bryn Hill, which I'm pretty familiar with, most of who I meet are Intel and Nike. So we're building where I live in Bryn Hill for people who work in Hillsborough. Whereas, so how does North Plains decide how many homes we need to build for people who work in a different city?
Yep.
Versus what I was surprised by living where I live is almost nobody is moving into those houses that were in North Plains. So we're not really growing to accommodate new businesses in our city. We're growing to take somebody else's city's business people here.
Yeah. So as the system works currently, there is different rulemaking happening around housing at the state level right now. But growth for housing and employment, well, growth for housing is based on population forecasts that come from the Portland State University Population Research Center. And they put those out about every 3 or 4 years for all the cities across the state. And by law, that's what cities have to base their growth projections on. So the housing needs analysis takes that population growth number and translates that through a series of steps into the types of housing that are needed for different income levels, and then that is translated into acres. And I should say that both the housing needs analysis and the economic opportunities analysis, we're gonna do a little deeper dive into at meeting number 2, so you can really see how those figures were arrived at. But my short answer is that the residential need is really based on that population growth number from Portland State University, and employment numbers, projections can either be based on that same population number or estimates from the Oregon Department of.
Well, yeah, the employment land need estimation ultimately does have to be consistent or supported by employment projections, employment forecasting. Cities do get some leeway in terms of the types of industries that they want to pursue, or the particular land needs of different types of industry clusters, that sort of thing. But ultimately, the big part of that is employment forecasts. So it's either population forecasts for housing or employment forecast backed land need for employment land.
And again, we'll go deeper into these, how these figures are arrived at our next meeting, but does that answer your question for now?
Well, it just seems a little odd initially that we're not building the houses for our own people. I mean, I understand that the analysis showed that there's gonna be a bunch of businesses, new businesses, growth inside North Plains. Those people need homes. But currently what's happening is we're building homes for Hillsborough businesses, and then they live here and go to Hillsborough. That just seems different than I would have conceived of this happening.
Jay.
Just to address that, I mean, people move where they move. We live in a country where we get to choose that. But this process 1 through 4, and you can do all the annals and everything else, but people who buy those homes are gonna be the people who buy those homes. This is a process where we're getting numbers based off of studies that say this is the growth that's gonna be in this area. And I work in other cities too. I also work in North Plains. So, and I've lived here a long time. That's how I survived. But you have to look at the needs of the city. How is the city going to plan for its growth? Is what I've always thought of this.
I'm gonna have Bill respond, and then I'm also gonna ask if Kevin has anything to add, because he might be able to speak to it more eloquently. Go ahead, Bill.
So Don, to get your question, it's purely population forecasting that is taken and turned into housing need and land need. There's no provision for where those people work, or like, you know, that the methodology that is required doesn't get into those things. But having said that, and we'll do the deep dive, like Steve said, at the second meeting. Right now, the city's, you know, the amount of land developed in the city right now versus for that's housing versus how much is business investment, businesses themselves. We're approaching 85% housing, 15% employment land. There's just not enough businesses here to be employing for people to live here and work here. And when we do the deep dive, you'll see that part of the EOA methodology and justification for the land need we identified is there aren't opportunities for people to work here. It's all people moving here and bedroom community growth. But we'll get into that and the balance between those two in the land need and the process of UGB expansion decision, expansion study process the previous time. But we'll deep dive on that stuff in the second.
Kevin, without going too much deeper, is there anything you would want to clarify about kind of the basis of these growth forecasts?
Well, I'm not a demographer. I'm not an expert there, but there's a reason why the Population Research Center at PSU does our population forecasts. It used to be that the system had population projections allocated by county. There tended to be a lot of arguments, a lot of litigation over which share of population growth should go where. So PSU's Population Research Center is kind of a neutral arbiter of, basically how much of the anticipated population growth in the state is going to go here, there, and elsewhere. So, that's essentially the system that has been in place now for, I don't know, maybe not quite 10 years, but it's now the law of the land. I should note, technical detail, if you're within Metro, it's actually Metro that does the population forecasting, but since North Plains is not within Metro, it's PSU.
Thank you, Kevin. And thanks, these questions are going to help us to continue to refine this presentation for the presentation to the public, and I'll get into some of the tracking of these questions for this project as we go on. Let's go to the next slide, please. I mentioned before land efficiency measures, ways the city looked inside the urban growth boundary before expanding. Some of the provisions that the city enacted included allowing attached single-family homes in the R5 zone, now allowing duplexes and triplexes in the R5 zone, allowing cottage housing in the R2.5 zone, setting minimum densities of at least 70% of maximum density in that R2.5 zone for affordable housing, and then reduced parking requirements and allowing mixed-use development in the commercial, the C1 zone, which includes downtown. So those are some of the things the city did to say, let's try to increase our capacity inside the urban growth boundary before we look to expand. Next slide, please. So ultimately, the housing needs analysis, the updated one in 2021, identified a base need of about 111 acres for housing. Then on top of that, the state rules allow you to add a certain percentage on for right-of-way, so things like roads and sidewalks, things of that nature. So that was another 16 or so acres. And then the city's parks plan, based on that plan, there's another 40 acres for parks. And then we had discussions with the school district about their growth forecasts, and they indicated that based on that population forecast, they did not need any land for additional facilities. So that was about 167 acres for residential land. Next slide, please. So I apologize on the headings for the next couple slides. This should say employment land need. And I want to start by saying that City Council established 4 priorities for community and economic development within this urban growth boundary expansion study process. I'll go ahead and just read through them. The first priority was to reverse the worsening trend of bedroom community status for North Plains with a thriving jobs housing balance by expanding and diversifying employment opportunity and industrial profile and presence. The second priority was to grow business investment in North Plains to encourage expansion and diversification of the city's property tax base to reverse that imbalance that Bill mentioned, created by a growing bedroom community development trend. Next slide, please. The third priority, to ensure and sustainably fund community supporting infrastructure, economy supporting infrastructure, and expanded city services such as recreational offerings that enhance community health and diversify the city's economy. And then the fourth priority was to expand the local presence of important everyday commercial services for the residents of North Plains, which offers a shorter and safer distance rather than an extended and costly distance to travel to other cities. So things like groceries. Next slide, please. So the city hired a firm to do an economic opportunities analysis, and that, again, we'll dive more into this at the next meeting, but that analysis identified a need for about 172 acres of commercial land and about 515 acres of industrial land for a total of 687 acres.
I have a question about the economic analysis. When I read through the paperwork, if I'm not mistaken, when they gave the criteria to the firm, it was, these are the type of industries we want to have here. Would that not change the analysis of land needed But I want to say that said, first thing on that list was a chip manufacturer, which is going to give you 300+ acres that you would need. So if those criteria were different, would that not change what's needed in this area?
I'm gonna remind us that we're gonna go deeper dive next time, but yeah, but I'll let Bill respond to that question.
In the EOA, I recall that there was a found need for up to 3 100-acre sites that would include a variety of different industries that were identified as candidate industries based on the Washington County economy and where North Plains is relative to Hillsborough and the freeway. But there isn't in the EOA or any finding that the city has need for a 300-acre site for a semiconductor manufacturer. Part of that is simply the city doesn't have the ability to get the water and power capacity to be that. So we don't have the EOA that the council adopted and is acknowledged and is informing all this doesn't have that. So I just want to clarify that a mega site is not in our land use findings.
Yeah, I was just, from what I looked at, it was like we gave a listing of these are the types of businesses in priority order. And if that order was different, or if we looked at it differently, would that not change? Like if the number one wasn't a manufacturing facility with office space, would that not change the overall land that we would need for the?
Great question. I mean, potentially, but we part of the outreach, like, we'll get into it in a bit more detail, and so we'll follow up with some of these details. So thank you, because we weren't sure how much to go into for the second meeting, so this is good. But we part of the outreach was in working with the state's business development department, Business Oregon, and industry groups, and just realistically, business park and office isn't a big thing for North Plains. I mean, if it was, then yeah, it would change, but we tried to identify what seemed highest probability so that it would be a worthwhile thing to try to plan for. So.
Okay, next slide, please. So again, that gave the city a total land need of 855 acres. And Don, to your question again, because of the adoption of the housing needs analysis, the city needs to address that residential need, that 167 or at least 111 acres for residential need. For the 688 acres of employment, the city can choose to expand and address that entire need all at once. They can do it phased over time. There's no timeline on when a city needs to address that employment need. However, and I don't want to speak for city council, but I think based on those priorities, you can see that for city council, it was a priority to address that employment land need, and that's why it was included.
We're required to do the employment by the urban growth boundary rules of the state of Oregon.
You are not required. That's what I'm saying.
Because of the 10,000 thing?
Yes. The city is required to address the residential need, but not the employment need.
Can I just make a comment too?
Please.
So the first UGB expansion that we had, when they went through that process, they didn't even look at economic development. All they looked at was housing. That was it.
This was in 2005?
5 or 4 or 5. So they didn't even have the studies or go through that exercise of even thinking about the future of having any type of economic development for the community. And so when we're going through this process, that was one of the things that jumped out at us saying, okay, well, we need to look at how we're going to balance tax base over time. And this is what we came up with. And we looked at that number and thought, okay, let's see how we can plan for economic development in the future. And I don't think people realize that that first UGB was like, there was no economic development conversation whatsoever. It was all about housing.
Or the second one, for Rachel. That was a UGB extension. That managed that land and that was residential.
Yeah, but the UGB process in 2005, there was no conversation about economic development. It's all just about residential needs. Yeah, that's the point I was making.
Yes, sir.
Sorry origin again, but, so we did the housing needs analysis and that locked us into having to do UGB. Is there any way to roll back the clock and like before the housing needs analysis, we can get out of the whole UGB process, or are we locked in now? Because it seems like one is kind of organic and the other one is according to the UGB template, which includes a template would mean you have to have these particular things, you have to have a 20-year supply of housing and you have to, there's criteria for it. And then if the city council, once we come up with recommendations, city council approves recommendations, the county approves recommendations, it goes to the state and the state can decide, this okay, this is no, and they can decide whatever they want, right?
I'm gonna defer to Kevin on that question. I hope you heard it, Kevin. And maybe you can chime in on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard all of the question. I would say I guess what I heard was, can you back out of the housing capacity analysis?
Yeah.
Well, it has been adopted. And so there is what we call the concurrency requirement, which is you can't adopt a housing needs analysis without at the same time addressing any deficits in your housing needs. Essentially what you have to do would be unadopt it and walk away from all the work that had been done in putting that document together. I think it could be done. I'm not here to take sides, but that's what it would require if you wanted to not expand the UGB, would be to essentially just say, we're not going to worry about our community's housing needs at this time.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay. All right, so if everyone's good on the land need, then I'm gonna move forward to the urban growth boundary analysis process. Let's go ahead with that. Go ahead. So, first thing I wanna make sure we understand is that, this goes back to 2014 and some legislation that was passed. Cities do have the ability to designate what are called urban reserves. So this is outside of an urban growth boundary, kind of identifying where a city wants to grow over the next 30 to 50 years. So you can have urban reserves that say, this is where the city is going to urbanize in the future. This process was developed to create more certainty for landowners and people who plan for public facilities, etc. There are also rural reserves. Those are areas that are to be protected for farm and forest uses over the next 50 years. Not every city in the state, and in fact, I think probably most cities in the state don't have urban or rural reserves. In the case, and we'll go through North Plains, there are plenty of areas that don't have either designation. They're not set aside for urbanization. They're not set aside for farm and forest. They're just undesignated. So I just wanted to use that as a baseline. Next slide, please. So you can see there in the upper left-hand side, the city of North Plains, that's the gray is the current urban growth boundary. Outside, all the green on this slide is rural reserve. So those are areas that North Plains is not able to expand into because it's preserved for farm and forest uses. The brownish color is what I just mentioned in terms of undesignated land. It's not designated for urban uses. It's not designated for agricultural uses. It's undesignated. And I will do my best to represent what I understand was, what I've been told was the conversation back in 2014 when the legislature passed what is called, what some people refer to as the grand bargain, which established some of these urban and rural reserves and Metro's urban growth boundary. And again, if anyone from North Plains or if anyone from DLCD, was part of these conversations, please chime in. But my understanding is that undesignated land was left undesignated purposefully. It wasn't set aside for agriculture. It provided an opportunity for urbanization, but really for North Plains to determine its own fate, so to speak, as it decided how it wanted to grow and develop over time. So I think that undesignated land that you see around North Plains was intentional as a possible place for the city to grow over time. Does anyone who was part of those conversations in this room, or Kevin, if you heard anything that I might have misrepresented about that, please chime in. Sure.
What I will say is that during the urban growth boundary study and hearings process last year, former Washington County chairs Andy Dyke and Tom Bryan jointly submitted a letter to give some history to the urban reserves process and how North Plains ended up with the map that we do. And what they characterized is consistent with what Steve just described. The lands around North Plains were left undesignated because that land was not intended to be protected for farm and forest use, but it was also not left to be definite area to urbanize in the future. But the primary reason was because the county, Washington County at the time, didn't have a process to determine how cities outside of the metro urban growth boundary, like Banks and North Plains, the county didn't have a process yet to identify how to make things urban reserves outside of the Portland Metro UGB. So as you can see on the map, the blue area, just kind of north of Hillsborough on the map, those areas that are shaded blue were designated as part of the grand bargain process with Metro urban reserves. But North Plains has its own urban growth boundary, and there wasn't really a process to set up urban reserves with Washington County back then. So it just left land potentially for future growth undesignated. And if North Plains wanted to pursue urban reserves in the future, they could, or they don't have to. That was what former Chair Bryan and former Chair Dyke relayed in their joint letter to the city.
This was the late 90s, 2000. I remember those meetings. With Metro coming out, kind of explain why they had those areas as undesignated.
Yeah, and
it was actually the state, there was a bunch of others involved in that process. And Metro was looking at what they looked at as their prime places to maintain as rural. I do remember those conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Days.
Anyone else? Okay. Todd, did you have anything to clarify? Okay. Maybe both of us weren't involved in those conversations. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the first thing that a city does, thank you.
I'm sorry to stall and
No.
be explicit. I was serving as city manager in Cornelius at the time, and the grand bargain process was not really a public process. We learned from the League of Oregon Cities that the grand bargain was a done deal. This was maybe on a Wednesday, Thursday. I made some calls, did some probing, and found out that there was going to be a meeting in Hillsborough on the following Sunday. And when we got to the meeting, we included Mayor Jeff Delane and Cornelius, who's still there, Mayor Pete Truax in Forest Grove, who's no longer serving. And the meeting was in Hillsborough, and we sort of forced our way into the meeting because some decisions were being made in the county in general and in the area out there where I was serving, and people were not privy to it. And the primary goal of the state of Oregon, goal 1, is public involvement. You may not like the decisions that are made, you may love them, but they should be made in a public process, and it wasn't. And when we came to the meeting, the lead legislator at the time basically said, this decision was made. You can comment about it if you want, but nothing's going to change as a result of today. And so both mayors gave impassioned pleas about protecting goal 1, and myself having been a mayor for 16 years and both mayors, Forest Grove and Cornelius, we know how, and we knew how significant inviting people to the table was. You may not like what people say, or you may not like the decision, but it's part of the democratic process. And so I think some of us look at 2014 and the grand bargain as a very shallow, dark, silent, deaf moment for the state of Oregon. And you'd have a tough time doing that today, I think. But whatever stars lined up did, and the public was left out of that process. And for, I think, all of us who were involved in that, or many of us, it left a really bitter pill about the fact that smaller communities were left out of the decision, and there was no public discussion about it. And if I hadn't been super aggressive about finding out where it was and what it was, we wouldn't have been at the table. So I think it's just important to know things can happen you don't expect to happen. And again, that's why goal 1 involves public involvement, so that people at least know what's happening.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the next slide. So when you start the urban growth boundary process, you heard me mention a study area earlier. Cities of North Plains size need to have a study area starting at least a half mile from the current urban growth boundary. But it can be larger than that. And because we had a pretty large land need, we looked at an area about 1 mile from the current urban growth boundary. We also, at this point in time, can exclude, there's provisions to exclude certain types of land. You know, any land, if you were expanding for a specific industrial or public facility need and the land didn't meet your criteria, you could exclude that land. Land that is impracticable is the word that's used to serve, basically, and can mean just too expensive or too difficult to serve with public facilities. Areas subject to natural hazards, specific scenic, natural, cultural, or recreational resources, and then non-urban federal lands. So next slide, please. So this is the line that we started with, and you can see that that the land just about encapsulates all of the undesignated land that I mentioned earlier. The green, probably not the best choice of color, but the green is the undesignated land. That grayish is all rural reserves for the most part. Next slide, please. Then we mapped some of our environmental constraints, some of those resources that I mentioned earlier. So you can see, especially on the east side, there are there's a creek and some significant wetlands. That doesn't mean that the city couldn't look to bring those areas into the urban growth boundary, rather that it reduces the amount of land that's actually buildable when we try to meet that 855 or whatever acres we're trying to meet, that we're talking about land that's buildable, not just gross acres. Next slide, please. I mentioned that the state has a program for prioritizing lands to bring in the urban growth boundary. So the first priority is urban reserves. And I mentioned earlier that North Plains does not have any urban reserves. And then what we call rural exception lands. Those are lands that are outside of city limits, but have zoning designations such as rural residential, 5 acre, or rural commercial, or rural industrial. They're basically areas that have more urban uses, but are still outside of the city. So those are identified as a pretty high priority to bring into the city limits or into the urban growth boundary. The second priority is what's called marginal lands. I'm not going to go into what that is because I'm no expert on it, but marginal lands only exist, I believe, in 2 counties in the state, and North Plains has no marginal lands. And then the third and fourth priority are really based on the quality of the soil and the land for rural uses, for agricultural or forest uses, with the third priority being lower value farmland, and the fourth being higher value farmland. So basically the way you go through the process is you say, okay, First priority is our rural exception lands. Is there enough exception lands to meet our need? No. If not, we take that land in and then we go to the next priority, which is the low value farmland. Is there enough low value farmland for us to meet our need? If yes, we're done. If no, then we go to high value farmland. So that's the process. And we can walk through that in a little more detail at our next meeting. I know we're running a little behind, so I'm going to keep moving. Go ahead to the next slide. We also apply land suitability criteria. This is another opportunity to remove certain lands from consideration if they are not suitable for development. So for industrial uses, if land has already been parcelized into small parcels, I believe the threshold is 5 acres. Land that we kept in the study just for the purposes of analysis, but we always intended to remove. Again, goal 5, which is natural cultural resources. If a site for industrial uses, if a site is too small or steep, land with conservation easements, and then lands that are public parks, schools, churches, cemeteries, or airports. Next slide, please. So we got to, this is the map that we looked at to do that part of the analysis. It's a little hard to see, but all of the green, this shows zoning, and all of the green is what's called exclusive farm use. So that's not exception lands. There's also something called AF, I think agricultural farmland, 20 acres. That also is not considered exception land. So that those blues. But then when you look down to south of the highway, you see that the red, and it's hard to see, but it's a little bit lighter blue. One is rural commercial, and I think the other, is it rural industrial? Rural industrial. Rural industrial. Those are considered exception lands. So in that system of priorities that I mentioned, those lands would come into the urban growth boundary first. There's the land to the west surrounding the airport also would be considered exception land because it's rural residential 5 or 2, something. I don't know what the zone is. Do you know offhand?
I don't recall.
Okay. Anyway, it's a rural residential designation. But we worked with through the process due to the challenges of accommodating our residential land need around an airport. And the fact that the land is already pretty parcelized up with people's homes and hangars that face that airstrip, we just decided to work to exclude that from our study area. So the land to the east, the light blue and the red is in the study area, but it's kind of hard to see the hash marks, but all the hash marks were excluded from the study area. Next slide, please. Oh, and this is that same map, but with those resources, those environmental resources as well, the streams and the wetlands. Next slide, please. Actually, I'm going to go back for a second, and we can provide more information on this next time. I don't have the slides to show it, but I mentioned those 3rd and 4th priorities, which are low value farmland and then high value farmland. All the areas that aren't south of the highway, pretty much without exception, there might be little strips here and there, but it's pretty much all considered high value farmland. There was really no low value farmland for that 3rd priority. So basically what the city was left with was that exception land to the south, and then everything else in terms of the soils analysis. And there's a very specific regulations around how you do this analysis to determine if it's high value or prime farmland. All of the rest of the land in the study area is high value farmland. And again, we can go into that in greater detail next meeting. Next slide, please. So once you have your study area and your priorities set, then you apply these goal 14 factors. So these didn't necessarily need to be applied to that exception land because that we know is coming in. That's the first priority. It's not enough acres to meet the full need, the full 855 acre need. So that's coming in. But the rest of the area needs to be evaluated in terms to determine in which direction do we grow. And there's these 4 factors. The first is the efficient accommodation of identified land needs. The second is the orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services. The third is comparative environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences. And the fourth is compatibility with nearby agricultural and forest activities. So the city did a study. Well, let's go to the next slide. The first thing that we did was identify these different sub areas for the purpose of analysis. So there's really the west, the north, the east, and then the south. I said we didn't necessarily need to include that in the study, but we did. And we had south sub area A, which is that area around the airport, and south sub area B. Next slide. And based on the results of applying those 4 factors to the different sub areas, the study found, as I mentioned, south sub area B is the first priority, so that came in first. The east sub area was kind of the second. I don't want to use the word priority, but the second sub area, or scored the highest, or was the most development ready, based on again those 4 factors: the location of infrastructure, the potential impacts to adjacent farm and forest uses, and these energy and environmental consequences. This did not include the Recology site. That site, for those of you who are familiar, the kind of waste and recycling area that's just east of the city, that was not included. But that was a total of 412 acres. The next most development ready area was to the north. That's about 90 acres. Members thought that it was a natural extension of residential development to the north. And if you can go back to the map, you can see the kind of dark hashed area in the red sub area. That is a reservoir that was thought to be a good location for a community park. And I'll say that sub area totally is 397 acres, but if you recall, we only needed about 167 acres of residential land. A portion of that the committee thought would be accommodated in the east, and then only 90 acres of that north area would be needed for residential development. If you can go back down again.
So the red area goes all the way up to Pumpkin Ridge Golf Course.
It does, yeah.
That's the boundary.
Yeah, but the recommendation, I think I have a map of the recommendation in just a moment, only brings in a portion of that sub area.
Stuff just a little bit above the lake, I think.
Yeah, because people felt that north is not an appropriate location for industrial development. It's essentially why instead, the end of the recommendation, next slide, look to the west to meet the rest of that employment land need. So that was 319 acres. That area to the west, I think Bill mentioned earlier, is the least development ready. Again, there were more acres, if you could go back up, there were more acres in that west sub area than were needed. So the committee skewed towards the southern portion of that sub area. And let's go 2 slides ahead. Hopefully I've got you know what? I don't know that I have the map, the recommendation map. Well, we'll have to include that in the slide next time, but I kind of described that boundary for you. I apologize that that is not in this presentation. But that was the recommendation that was put forth by City Council. Okay. Where's this title? Oh, you want to pass that around?
Is that the one you were looking for? That's the proposed UGB?
Yeah, do you want to pass that around so people can see that? Thank you.
And I believe it's on the Relook website here.
Oh, that's a good idea. Pause the presentation for a second. Here you go, Steve. So that's the west, north, south, west.
Steve, quick question. I asked this when I was going to the meetings a long time ago, whatever. The area to the east of the Arco. So south of 26,
Yes.
east of Glencoe. I think Andy told me when I asked that question that it was part of some musical state deal or something that section is not being brought in. I was just wondering, what is that? Like, what is that state deal? Or why not?
Yeah, I believe, why it was determined the way it was, I'm not sure, but that, I believe, falls into the rural reserves. So it's not even eligible for the city to expand into, and why that decision was made, I couldn't tell you. And if we, maybe we'll go back to that map at some point, but the map that showed the undesignated and the rural reserves, you can pretty clearly see that there's a triangle of land, but it ends at on the west side of Glencoe, and doesn't extend to the east side of Glencoe.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's just really interesting because that land is zoned AF5, right? So it's not EFU, nothing like that. And it's a very seemingly, in my opinion, a seemingly small, useless plot of land for farming. And it's another 11 or 12 acres that probably could be used for farming. But anyways, just a question.
Go ahead, Daniel.
When they actually did the overpass over into North Plains, that was the way you got into North Plains. There was a road out there, actually. You go into the dirt, there's still probably asphalt on it.
Yeah.
You came across, 26, which was 2 lanes at that time. Came on the other side where the college is and drove into North Plains. And they built the overpass.
Yeah, crazy.
So I know that land is, as far as farming, it's got a lot of issues as far as if you wanted to put a plow to it.
Right.
But when, in the late 90s, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but when Metro was in here and they were talking about all this rural reserves and stuff, that's where they drew the line across there. And a lot of it had to do with the wetlands that were involved in that area. For the waterfowl, different. There was a lot of things I remember, and it was pretty much shoved down our throat. We didn't have much discussion on it. This is the way it's going to be. So this was very interesting being in those meetings with Metro. They asked for opinions, but they didn't want any.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good.
And Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't, it's my understanding, even after talking to Stuart King, who was part of the first UGB expansion, that there was a determination that they did not want to build on the south side of 26, because they didn't want to separate the city, like they wanted to keep everything north, right? And that's where the focus was, so that everything could be north of 26.
So the one part that was the 2020 plan, before Stuart was actually on the planning commission, and we looked at this. The expansion was to go over the freeway.
Yeah.
Because that was the county was saying, right? They don't. That's why we took in the area we did to the east, because there was already businesses there, and the county doesn't like urban anything. They like to just have bare land.
Yep.
And so that was kind of what we're looking at now with on the other side of the freeway. But the biggest constraint on that was the infrastructure going across the freeway.
Right.
The high cost of that, the issues that came up with that, and the division that typically happens because of a freeway separation.
Yeah.
So I just remember bits and pieces. I don't remember every bit of it, but it was interesting for me. It was, Metro sat down and they would sit there and say, we're here to discuss this, but there was no discussion on any of it. It was, this is where the line is.
Yeah.
I have a question. Can that discussion be revisited with either the county or state? Because I know that, having the city divided could be an issue, but if you have industrial development over there, it's less of an issue because access to the freeway is the biggest issue, right?
From a city standpoint, we looked at the cost to go across the freeway with infrastructure was extremely high versus what the county was really wanting us to take was the old Holland Farm deal and the businesses along that between West Eden and the tracks. They did not want that land, and they said they wouldn't do anything unless that was part of the deal.
Yeah, the intention of the project advisory committee, and I think city council, was that there would not be residential development south of the highway, but that from an economic development standpoint, capturing traffic coming off of the highway at that interchange was an important thing for the city to take advantage of.
Right.
Okay, I apologize for not having that UGB recommendation map in the packet or in the presentation, but we'll be sure we get that out to you. And if there's no other questions, I
have a quick question.
Yes.
I see the map. here on paper, but is it possible for the council to facilitate a visit for the committee so that for us to have the first hand view of the UGB area instead of I know this is a reconstituted committee with a lot of new members. Is it possible for us to have a tour of the actual UGB area? I believe it will help to inform some of our decisions or recommendations.
I'm gonna turn to staff here to see if that's.
Like a bus stop.
Yeah.
I like the idea. Let us look into the logistics and ability to do that. I mean, these folks live in those areas, so they may or may not want a tour, but let us look into that because I think the idea of eyes on some of this is worthwhile.
Thank you for that request. Okay, we're gonna move forward to, that's how the city got to their recommendation. So what are we doing in this relook process? Excuse me. So we have essentially in the scope that we laid out with the city 4 tasks. The first is outreach and education. That includes a frequently asked questions document. Try to add some water. Excuse me. That document is going to be our way to track all of the questions and responses that we hear from the community and all of you. I think I'm good now. Thank you. Throughout this process. So there's going to be a document online. We've already started drafting it. It has what we think are the questions that people are going to ask and those responses. I don't know if
it made it all the way here.
Yeah, I know. It's sparkling.
I know.
The FAQ document, and so all the questions that you're asking tonight, Natalie is taking notes of, and we're going to keep building on this FAQ document. So it's kind of a living document that tracks all of the questions and answers that people have throughout the process. That's our intention and our way of making sure that we're being really transparent about what questions we're getting from the community and what the responses are. I mentioned earlier, there's a project website. We'll continue to build that out, make sure it has all the information it needs. This is our first meeting of the Relook Advisory Committee. There's going to be 4 meetings overall. We have an upcoming meeting, community meeting number 1, which we'll talk about in just a moment and the date of that. And then staff is going to be available. This conversation we're having tonight, staff's going to be available if there are groups like the chamber or a PTA or Elks Club or whatever group it might be to go out to those groups and give a presentation and we know that not everyone wants to or can make it to larger public meetings, so we wanted to make sure that we're reaching out in other ways. The second task, so tonight is really, as I mentioned, this first task is education and outreach, trying to bring everyone to the same page with the process that happened before and how we got to today. The next phase is going to be looking at different alternatives for that urban growth boundary location. We're going to do a deep dive on how we got the housing and employment needs that we got, and then start to look at alternative boundary options. That community meeting number 2 is going to be a workshop format. Well, let me take a step back. Community meeting number 1, our intent is to give a presentation similar to this one and just have an open question and answer session afterwards. We want to give people, I think a lot of people feel like they haven't had a chance to speak their voice. So we want to make sure that it's open mic and people will have a lot of time to ask questions and staff, and we'll have our friends from ODOT and DLCD and myself will be there to answer questions to the best of our abilities. Again, we want everyone to be operating with the same information. The second public meeting, like I said, is going to be a workshop format with, if any of you have ever participated in a mapping exercise where we have small groups, if we're doing it here, at tables throughout this room, and folks having conversations and kind of making their own recommendations on where they draw the line. That's what we're going to do at that second community meeting. Next slide, please. For the third community meeting, we will work with you all based on what we hear from the community, doing those mapping exercises and what you learned from throughout this process. We're going to work with you to develop about 3 different alternative boundaries based on what we're hearing from the community and with your guidance. At community meeting number 3, we'll ask people to attend, and they won't necessarily vote on, I want A, B, or C, but they'll say, this is what I like and don't like about A, this is what I like and don't like about B, and about C. And then at the 4th meeting of this group, we'll review that information and put forth some sort of recommendation, whether that's one boundary or a report that shows, you know, differing opinions. We'll try to come to consensus on that, but this group will be making some sort of recommendation that will then go to Planning Commission and City Council and into an adoption process. Any questions about kind of what we're trying to accomplish there? Yes.
Is there a way for someone who's unable to attend any of the community meetings or is not part of a group? Is there surveys or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that. We will be mimicking the community meetings. Well, we'll have the first community meeting will be a hybrid meeting, so people will be able to participate. We could also use a community survey for people, or some way for people to give questions, because that's really what that's about. It's about answering questions. For the second meeting, we will have an online mapping exercise where people can do the same thing that people will be doing in the room to try to draw those alternative boundaries. And then again, for the third community meeting, there'll be some sort of survey where people can comment on the alternatives that this group comes up with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay, skip a couple slides ahead. Oh, wait, what was that one? Oh, I wanted to mention, and it was mentioned a little bit earlier tonight, the city did receive a grant from the Oregon Department of Transportation, the Transportation Growth Management Program, to do planning for an urban growth boundary expansion area. However, we are going through this process to determine what that area is. The purpose of the grant is to develop a preliminary land use and transportation concept plan. So that would include land uses and locations, the transportation network, utilities, parks and trails, public facilities, and then funding strategies. Because we're going through this process, this concept plan process is going to start, and early in the process, what a concept plan process does is study existing conditions. So what's in the study area? So for the existing conditions portion of the project, they're going to look at the current September 2023, that full UGB area, just for the existing conditions though. And then that project is going to pause, if it's in a position to pause, and wait until this relook process is done and a new or modified boundary is approved by City Council. Then the rest of that project will look at, you know, like all those things, land use planning, parks and trails for the modified study area. So you're probably going to hear about this project, and I want to make sure people understand that at the beginning, it's moving a little bit parallel to us, but then it's going to pause and wait until there's a new UGB recommendation that gets adopted by City Council. And then that concept plan will be for that new UGB expansion area, not the September 2023 expansion area.
So to be clear, when we're looking at this and going through the mapping process.
For the relook?
For the relook, we're really trying to identify the area, the land, almost like a boundary, like a line. Right?
Exactly the boundary.
We're not, I know, but I want to be clear about this, right? Because I think there's some conversation that people think we need to know where the parks and the trails and everything are going to go before this process even completes. And I think that there's some confusion that we have to do this before that, or that before this, or in conjunction. So I think I just want to make sure that we're really clear what is our task at hand. And I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, you know, if North Plains was inside Metro and had an urban reserve, that boundary is already drawn, and you would be able to plan for residential use and employment use, and where do the parks go and where do the roads go. North Plains doesn't have a boundary to plan for. So this relook process is really to establish the line, the boundary. Now, it would be really hard to draw a line without at least talking about where we think those land uses might go, where we think we want homes, where we think we want employment uses to go. So that will be part of our conversation. But the recommendation that this group puts forward and that ultimately city council adopts is a line. It is a modified boundary. And the subsequent concept plan is where the details get put on the ground, certainly with information that's been gathered and discussed through this process, but it is a subsequent step because you can't really plan for an area until you know what the boundary is.
But we can think about those kind of things
Yes.
when we're still going through this process.
100%, that can be part of the conversation, but we're not, well, this group isn't making any decisions, it's making recommendations. But the recommendation is gonna be the line, and we can have some, in the recommendation or the report that goes to planning commission and city council, we can have some of the logic that you all have behind the recommendation. Oh, we really think that residential should go here, employment should go here. But yes, the recommendation is the line, the boundary, not the final location of specific uses.
Thank you.
That's a great clarification.
Hey, I had the question about the grant.
Yes.
And my question is, so it sounds like the grant's gonna cover part of it, and it's gonna go a whole, and then it's gonna cover the remainder. But the middle part is what the grant is not gonna cover?
The grant covers the concept plan, right? And I'll let, Bill speak to this process, the relook process.
Yeah, I mean, this, kind of just reiterating, this process basically just will result in a recommendation for the new UGB, the outer line, right? And like Steve said, since we're not in the Portland Metro UGB, since North Plains has its own UGB, after the new line is drawn, then we formally fill in with this grant where everything's going within it. But I think, in the intervening past several months, there's been confusion about, why didn't you plan everything inside the line, or, speculation about what's going in the line. Really and truly, the way we as a city have to plan, because we have our own urban growth boundary, it really is the essential big first step is just that line. And again, like Steve said, based on residential uses generally make sense here, and a big park generally makes sense here, and there's a freeway interchange, so it probably makes sense for employment to be closer to that rather than housing right on the free, right near the, that sort of thing. But we can't do the planning with this until you all have helped us with given council a recommendation on the line, just the line.
And if I can add to that, the state will not give the dollars to do the work until there is an adopted boundary. So there is a bit of a chicken and an egg. The state wants the boundary to be identified, so we know what the need is, and then they give us the money to be able to plan for all that infrastructure and uses within that new boundary. And that is the key, being outside of Metro and not having that boundary already identified is why we operate a little bit differently than the cities and the communities that are in the Metro boundary.
Thank you.
Can you go a couple slides? I only have one more slide, and then we want to open for any final questions and then public comment. I mentioned we have a community meeting coming up on October 28th. I actually do have one more slide that shows some next steps. And our proposed agenda is, we'll have to modify a bit from this, but similar to this, where we want to present some information so people understand kind of how we got to where we are today. We want to present information on what this relook process is. And then we want to just open it up to question and answer, much like the great questions we got from all of you tonight. We'll have the first version of the frequently asked questions document by then, so that might answer a lot of people's questions just in that document itself. But again, for the first step, we really just want to hear from people, answer questions, dispel myths, whatever the case may be. Any thoughts or questions about things that we should be thinking about as we plan out that community meeting based on what you heard tonight?
I got one suggestion. I spent 25 years in the construction and development industry, and just being a sponge tonight and listening, like one thing to consider is breaking things down into layman's terms. there's folks in this room that may or may not understand, Steve, some of what you're trying to express, and I think that might be something to think about.
Thank you. We'll take another look at all the language we're using and do our best to make it as clear as possible. I know we try and fail at that oftentimes, but so thank you for that comment.
Maybe it's gonna be covered at some point, but to me, the one thing that's missing is the economic justification for growth, because I always presumed we wanted Sunset Ridge where I give, or Bryn Hill, because there's a huge economic benefit to the city of North Plains. But I was at meetings at different times earlier when they said, no, we don't really make that much money off of Bryn Hill or Sunset Ridge. So then the question comes up to the old timers in North Plains, so what's the point? Why did you bring all these extra people in? You know, like I've been one who's pushed for years, I'd love to have a rec center, swimming pool. But when I bring it up, they said, well, that doesn't really translate to money in the budget. In fact, the budget is not doing that well. And there's a guy I've been reading more about because I'm retired. Strong Towns is his theme. And he said, sprawl, suburbia doesn't make you much money. You make more money by fixing up what you already have. So I think the economic justification for growth is really an important discussion. Is if we're building houses for Hillsborough people to come live here because we make so much money off bringing them here, I get it. But then otherwise, those people are saying, why are we doing it? And the same with, it would be interesting to hear that report from Bill, how we do economically with Bryn Hill and Sunset. And then the other thing is, I noticed, because I go up and down West Union a lot, we've got maybe 10 or 12 small commercial businesses. That would be a good discussion too, for the amount of acreage, how profitable is how are they to the North Plains? Because in theory, that's why we're promoting growth along West Union, is we make money off it. So I think that's an important part of the discussion is, why grow unless you're making money?
Great.
And helping. What I hear from people, because I'm retired, I walk around town a lot, they're going, you know, Bryn Hill and Sunset don't translate to anything for me. And that, to me, is a fair observation.
Thank you. We'll definitely include that. You know, for this group, we'll go over that in great depth at our next meeting, but we'll definitely put some of those elements in the community meeting presentation.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
was just saying something. I was the previous COO at Central City Concern. And I just hope we recognize that we are in a state in housing crisis. And I hope we put something on the table besides that, how much money will we make? Because we're very comfortable in our little community. So I just want to put that out there.
Yep, thank you. Okay. If we don't have other questions for now, let's go to next steps. No, we'll do next steps at the end. I want to ask if any members of our in the room public would like to give public comment this evening. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, please. I guess do it from there. I don't know that we have anything set up, so please introduce yourself. You know the drill, 2 to 3 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, hi, my name is Aaron Nichols. Tonight I'm representing Friends of North Plains Smart Growth. We're the group that brought the referendum on the previous urban growth boundary. It might take me a couple more than 2 minutes, but I think it is worth hearing our concerns up front and incorporating them now rather than dealing with them later as we did last time. I think first I wanted to mention about the HNA. HNAs, before they are required, need to be accepted by the DLCD. Laura, Kelly, or Kevin can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is not yet accepted by the DLCD and it is being appealed. And so I would not say it is set at the moment. And secondly, I would say the HNA's current numbers, assuming around 7,000 people in North Plains were flipped and they've been corrected, they're now 5,500. So if we were to redo an HNA now, that's the numbers we use. Something to consider. The council could withdraw the HNA at the moment and use the correct numbers if they wished. So that's worth pointing out. But tonight, I'm testifying for you just on behalf of Friends of North Plains Smart Growth. Our group is committed to seeing a long-term plan for North Plains that wisely uses both the urban land and the farming land and is resident-led, as a feasible and actionable plan to see the lands brought in under Goal 14. We'd oppose any plan that greatly changes the character of the town, expands the town past the needs and wants of the residents or neighbors, cuts interested parties out of decision-making, or lacks sufficient planning and documentation to show the likely results of the expansion. We support the idea of the RELIF committee and hope for with you all to see a good plan emerge with broad base of support. We do want to register a concern at the beginning of the process with conflicts of interest. We do believe that this should be a very resident-led process, and including those who receive outsized benefit or are paid lobbyists, and it should not be on such a visioning board. Similarly, though less forcefully, we believe that elected officials and appointed officials who will make final decisions should stand to the side in this process and let neutral moderators and residents express themselves. That doesn't mean they can't participate, of course, simply that they wouldn't be on the dais and wouldn't be voting in this committee. We are committed to working with this process regardless of the committee makeup and acknowledge that both it's already decided and we believe it to be flawed. We believe a workable, implementable, and livable plan would require a radically different process and set of assumptions than the Ordinance 490. The process would need intentional and outreach and to both citizens and residents, and I think this is a good start. It would require planning along the orders of an order of magnitude study around transportation, water, power, and livability to have an idea of what an expansion would cost and what the city would look like. There's an example of such a study on our website, which I will give you the full thing. Maybe Steve can distribute it, and it has more detail on all of these points. We should consider multiple options, even those not favored by the committee, which I think would include no growth, although that's not our position. Enough time to ensure citizens are aware, have given feedback, and are comfortable with the process, if not the result. And specifically, I would say that is critical. If we don't feel that citizens have given enough feedback, if we haven't met our whatever goal this committee sets for citizen engagement, the process should not move forward. It should wait until we get that buy-in. I think we should see engagement of those who are affected but don't live in the city and the boundaries of the city. They are of course affected, and consider not just what we'll see in 20 years, but we want a community look like for generations to come. An example of just something that, because I know that's pretty big, would be looking at something like what other sorts of cities do we see as our models? Is it Hillsborough? Is it Dundee? Is it Newburgh? Like what other sorts of cities? Something bigger than just like, do we want this much industrial land? Do we want this much that and this? It's a visioning process. I think we should start with many options, and we should look very big in this process, and then figure out how to work within the law, of course, to get to something that we want, rather than feel that we are being tugged along by law, because we are not. The city does not have to expand.
Mr. Nichols, yes, would you mind giving us your address so we can give you additional information?
Yes, my address is 11,000 Northwest, email address or physical address, I'm sorry. Yes, of course. 11,000 Northwest Jackson Quarry Road, Hillsborough, Oregon, 97124.
Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah. Can I give you a copy of our plan?
Yeah, whether it's a physical copy or an emailed copy, that would be great.
And then we have Fawn Hosey online who has a hand up next. And Fawn, if you wouldn't mind unmuting.
Can you hear us, Fawn? You can click on the ask button, it might help. Is there anyone besides?
Okay, I'm here now. Sorry, technical difficulties on my phone here. Okay, so I'd like to share with you that I'm concerned as you.
Fawn, sorry to interrupt. Could you please just introduce yourself and give us your address?
Thank you. My name is Fawn Hosey. My address is 13515 Northwest Jackson Quarry Road. And that's 97124. So what I'm concerned about as we proceed with this conversation, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm really glad that we're having this relook. And I'm especially interested in the discussion that thinks about our values of our communities and our landscapes as we move into the next century, not just the next decade or 2 decades, but how is it going to be for our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren? We need to prepare for that now, because if we don't, we'll be stuck with whatever's left when we get there. So I'm thinking, do we want a livability that has clean air, clean and abundant water? Those are questions now. They're pretty big deal. Healthy soils. That'll be something that will help us sustain our future. Stable populations of fish and birds and other wildlife, happy neighbors, safe, quiet. And how about dark skies so we can see the stars at night? These are things that I only think about after they're gone, you know, and then it's kind of too late. It's hard to get it back. I've seen studies that show that slower growth is healthier for communities. So we need to understand our plans and actions in context with the needs of our future generations. We'll always need enough opportunities and environment for our workplace and our families and our visitors, of course. But we need to think about these values, these qualities of life that sometimes get lost in the numbers of dollars and the numbers of acres. So I'm really happy that we're having this chance to respond to the larger visions of our community. And when these values are part of the discussions, then we'll have unified support for the decisions that focus on the aspirations as well. And I've learned that aspirations and visions are two separate things. We need the transparency to share both of those. So we can improve our dialogue, and a new course can, and if we need it, a new course can be charted. So I thank you again. I don't want to take up more of your time.
Thank you, Fawn.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else online that would like to provide public comment this evening? We're not seeing any hands. So with that, could we go to the last slide of the presentation? And I just want to say I appreciate everyone staying a little later tonight. We obviously had a few technical difficulties in getting going here. So I just want to go through next steps. So we have our community meeting #1 on October 28th, and we'll be sharing the details of that with you and through the website and the other mechanisms that the city uses to publicize public meetings. In early November, we'll have our RAC meeting #2, and we almost have the dates set for these. We'll get these to you really soon. We just have to balance with when city council meets and other competing interests. So we almost have the schedule locked down, and we'll get that out as soon as we can. So we'll, at that second meeting, our next meeting, we'll review the results of the first community meeting. We'll dive a little deeper into the HNA and EOA, and I should mention the UGB analysis findings, and then kind of prepare ourselves for the second community meeting. And then towards the end of November, we plan to have community meeting I shouldn't say towards the end of November. I think it's like mid-November, before Thanksgiving, community meeting #2. And then in December, this group will meet, again, distill what we heard from the second community meeting, prepare those alternatives, bring those out to the community at another meeting in December. And then the fourth meeting of this committee will be to make its recommendation. To Mr. Nichols' comment, and I apologize because something in the scope that I didn't include in the presentation I included at the request of the city manager was in December, if we get to our fourth meeting and we decide that we need more time, that's something we'll communicate back to city council, that this group feels that, you know, whether we need a little bit more information or more time for deliberations, whatever the case may be, we can report back to city council and request another portion of time to allow for that. So I just wanted I didn't put that in the slides, but I wanted to mention that is something that we can do as a committee. So again, we'll get those dates out to everyone real soon. Yes, sir.
We're not required to go to the community meetings, right?
You are not required. You are encouraged, and you are encouraged to talk to your friends and neighbors. We'll give you materials to reach out to your networks. So please encourage people to participate. But you're not necessarily required to be at those.
Right, thank you. Are you going to set up any ground rules for community meetings? Like time limits, or, you know, I can see that a room full of 30, 40 people, they could go on forever.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, this came up in a previous city council meeting. Do they have to give their address, or can they just say where they live, that they live in North Plains or that they live in unincorporated? I know it came up there was a citizen before that had an issue with having to put out their full address in front of, on public record and in front of everybody. So it may make people more comfortable if they don't have to get that much detail.
Yeah, to the first question, we'll definitely put time limits. I mean, tonight we just had a few people, so, but for a meeting of that nature, we'll definitely put time limits on it. And, you know, it's not a formal city hearing, but maybe that's something we can talk about. Go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, could we provide the cards, like comments?
So it's not read aloud?
And so it's not read aloud, right? If you need something on the record, I just ask folks, what city do you live in? Or then I will say, okay, so is this your address that's on the card, just to have them verbally confirm or, affirm that the address that they wrote on the card is their actual resident.
I think we'll do our best to have that option. It might be tricky for the people online, but again, this isn't a formal hearing, so I don't know how important it is to have specific addresses, but it is nice to know where folks are coming from. But thank you for those questions.
One of the main reasons that we're doing that is so we can communicate back with them as a participant. And so that's the main reason why we would like to get there.
Yeah, I understand having it here,
But that's why the people online may have to still provide that, but I think the people that show up, the cards have been a great way to address that.
Any other questions for tonight? I know that was a lot. I hope that I talk way less going forward. But I appreciate your attention and your great questions. And like I said, that's going to help us build out our frequently asked questions document. And you'll hear from us again soon, both in preparation for the community meeting and for the next meeting of this committee. So thank you for your time. I hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you for everyone online as well.